The best and worst part about Obsidian and Zettelkasten is how simple they are. There's no rigid structure, so you can use it the way that you like it. You can start anywhere, but at the same time, it means you have to start somewhere, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed and to overthink how should I set it up in a way that's right, in a way that's effective. And so today, I want to share with you my current Zettelkasten workflow in Obsidian with the goal of wanting to take the inputs I have and turn them into output. So I'll share with you how I use tags, how I search, how I try to distill the ideas, and then connect them. If you're interested, keep on watching. My goal, very simply, is taking the input I consume and turn them into output. And I want to do this in a systematic way. I do not want to reinvent the wheels because that's what I was doing before. I found myself going back to the same source again and again, trying to find the same point. I couldn't go very deep into each of the points. And when I'm writing, sometimes I'm writing the same things over and over again without just having a block already ready to plot into different parts of things that I'm writing about. So doing things systematically, not reinventing the wheel, is very important. So to me, Zettelkasten is the perfect system. And if you still don't know exactly what it is, I did another video on this, so please check it out. Now, with the goal in mind, here is my note-taking process. There are 5 steps to this cycle. The first one is, of course, capturing notes. The second one is to process the notes. The third one is to connect them. The fourth one is producing output. And the fifth one is gathering the notes on reactions, on conversations that spurred from the output. Okay, first, capturing notes. This in Zettelkasten means 2 things. One is capturing fleeting notes, and the other one is literature notes. Quick reminder, fleeting notes is anything that pop up in your mind as you go through your day. Maybe it's in the shower, maybe it's when you're walking, and they disappear so fast, so you want to capture them. And the second one is literature notes, which from anything that you consume, you want to take notes and be able to remember them and record the sources. So what exactly will you write down on the notes? I'll share something a little bit controversial in the community. You let me know if you agree with this or not. And that is, I think you should write down everything that is interesting to you without judging it, without thinking, is this useful? Is this even a good idea or not? And the reason for that, I have 2. The first one is the Zettelkasten method, teaching us how to observe our thoughts, becoming aware of when we have fleeting thoughts and being able to capture those, and being aware of other people's ideas and being able to bring them together. So just at a very basic level, we need to practice noticing thoughts and trying to write them down. And the second one is, I think we are unable to judge the quality of an idea at one point in time, meaning that the Zettelkasten system is built to connect ideas, and it's built to connect ideas over time. So it's allowing the space for us to learn, to grow, to see ideas from different perspectives, and to be able to build on them continuously. So there's an element of time in the Zettelkasten system. So even if at the current moment we might think, okay, this idea, I'm not sure if it's interesting or not, whether it's useful or not, whether it can connect to any of my other ideas, doesn't matter. A year down the line, 5 years down the line, it might suddenly make sense. Like, oh, this is another layer to a different concept that I didn't understand before. So I think even if at this moment we don't know if it's a good idea or not, if it interests you, that is a signal, and I think it should be put into your Zettelkasten, because in the end, we have plugins in the tool where you find all of the orphan ideas that is not connected to anything. You can always purge them. It's not difficult at all. But if you want to retrieve that fleeting idea you had from 5 years ago, that's very difficult. So let me know in the comments, does that make sense? Do you have a different take? I would love to know. Let me show you an example with a book I'm reading called Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. So as we read this, or with any type of content you're consuming, really, there is an idea, then there are evidence, examples of the idea is connected to some of the other ideas, and they bring it back to the main point again. So how do I take notes on this? Well, at the beginning, there is a idea about the sampling period.
So let me show you what my note looks like.
So the idea is that in sports, there is something called the sampling period, where kids during that time is trying a bunch of different sports. They don't have rigid rules. They're not practicing, 10,000 hours. And this actually helps them outperform specialized kids who start with only one sport and try to get better at it. And it's an interesting idea because specializing too early hurts long-term performance. And this is counterintuitive, right? We're supposed to have grit, and we shouldn't be so scatterbrained, but the sampling period suggests that it is necessary for specialists later on to perform better. So what I did was write down the idea first, capture it. All of this happens in the next step of trying to process the note in a way that makes sense. So let me get to point number 2 and explain what happened here. Why we're capturing notes in the first place, which is to find it again. That is the purpose of capturing notes. And so how do you find your notes? Now, for me, at the beginning, when I thought about this, I thought, okay, I should just structure it like folders, that similar to the castens that Lumen had, which is, a folder for fleeting notes, a folder for literature notes. But I think a lot of people can relate to this. How you organize information doesn't mean how you retrieve the same information. And I realized, how I retrieve my information was actually in 2 ways: tags and search. So there is no need for me to have any folders because I never use them when I set them up. So now everything is saved in my root folder. Whenever I want to try to find something, I search for it in the search bar here, and also I look up tags. So let me then go on to step number 2 of how do you process your notes so you can find them more easily. Here I did 2 things. The first one is make my note atomic, and the second thing is make it more search friendly. When I capture notes, I actually don't necessarily try to make them atomic, because the point with capturing notes is that I want to get into the habit of capturing. And if I feel the friction of, maybe this is not atomic enough, I'm not doing it properly, then I will be less likely to capture notes as a habit. So I've given myself the permission to just capture notes however I want to do it. And then I'll have the processing part, which to Lumen is very important because you want to internalize the points, and use this step as the point where I turn them atomic and I make them more searchable. Let's come back to the range example and I'll show you how I process the note. So remember, we started with just this note. So all of this was gone and this was capturing the note. Now we want to process it, and there are 2 things I want to do. The first one is to make this note atomic. And the second one is to make it search friendly. So let's start with making this atomic. With Lumen's idea, each idea should fit on an index card so that it is as small as possible. But how do we do this in reality? For me, there are 3 categories I like to use to make sure each one of them is their own atomic note. And they are questions, ideas, and supplementary tools. So in the example of range, around the sampling period, there's a whole chapter dedicated to this, right? There is the idea, which is sampling period. Then there are multiple examples, scientific studies, anecdotes that support this idea of why the sampling period exists and why it's important. And so I want to first make sure that each anecdote is a note by itself. The reason I want to do that is because then I want to link it to this idea, because those studies can be linked to different ideas at different times as well. I want them to be their separate building blocks instead of attached specifically to this idea of sampling period. In the book, there were a list of 4 anecdotes that support this idea. So for the ones that are interesting, I've created separate notes for them. The ideas and the supplementary tools exist to answer questions. And again, these questions each are a note of itself because there are going to be so many ideas, so many examples that can contribute to these questions, right? So we want them to be separate from the sampling period note. The Zettelkasten method is training the flexibility of our thinking, right? Looking for connections, knowing that each idea, each anecdote, each question can connect to multiple things. Now, let's talk about the second part, which is making a note more search-friendly. I've mentioned before, I search in 2 ways. One is with tags, and the other one is with keywords. Those are the only things I use. So let's start with tags. Tags for me does 2 things. The first one is to categorize my notes. So as I've said before, in my notes, there are 3 categories. There's the questions, the ideas, and the supplementary tools. For all my question notes, they're tagged with questions. So if I ever want to bring up all of the questions I'm thinking about, then I can simply look at the tag question. Then for idea notes, there are 2 tags in order to categorize the type of ideas they are. One is paradox, and the other one is counterintuitive. This is because they are the theme of my writing. I write about paradoxes, I write about intersectional thinking, I write about counterintuitiveness. And so whenever I want to reference back to a list of counterintuitive ideas, I can already categorize them with tags in my Obsidian. So as you'll notice, probably again, somewhat controversially, I don't tag my notes with topics. Like, I don't know, this one could be sports or education, learning, whatever it is. And the reason for that is because when I create output, I don't think in topics. It does not help me if I have a list of everything that's related to education, because I write about intersectional thinking. So I'm trying to remove the somewhat arbitrary, I think arbitrary boundaries we have with subject matters. But it doesn't mean that, if that works for your workflow, definitely change the type of tags. The idea is that the tags should help you create output, right? It's in a way that makes sense to the way you're thinking about how you're going to take these ideas and what you're going to use them for. Then for the supplementary tools, I break them down currently to quotes, anecdotes, scientific studies. When I'm writing, when I'm creating output later down in the process, these are always the things I look for. Is there a quote that can express this idea succinctly? Are there anecdotes that I can bring to lighten up the story? Is there some sort of scientific study done that gives evidence, gives authority to the ideas I'm sharing? So the first use of tags is just to categorize, so later I can search for them in a systematic way. The second use of tags for me is to check status. Again, it comes back to the goal, input to output. So I need some sort of status tag for different ideas. The main ones I use are, number 1, build. So this indicates to me that this is an idea I want to build on over time. The second one is check. It's basically a note to self that if I'm in a hurry and I'm trying to jot down a note, things might not be as accurate or as specific as I want them to be. So it's a reminder to check the note and expand where I left the note. The third one I use is to read or to watch, and these are reminders to self of interesting things that I want to make sure I have the time to read and to watch and then take notes on them. As you know, a lot of the time when we're consuming one thing, they usually refer to other sources. And instead of losing those sources because we're in a crunch and we don't have time to check it out right away, I want to make sure I record them somewhere so that I know whenever I have time and I want to read something, I can just go back to this list of to read or to watch. So that's status in terms of input. As an example, right, I put build here because I think this idea is really interesting. Sampling period. I want to spend more time making connections, fleshing this out a little bit more. And I also put check next to this point I made about we think we need to specialize to get a good job, but in the long term it limits your earning potential. So I want to make sure that this is a correct statement, and I'll have to look up, earning potential. Is there any scientific study done on this that tracked that when you specialize, you actually earn less over time? And there is something in this book. I just need to find it. So that's why I put check next to it. Now for output status, the source of my outputs that currently benefit most from my Obsidian on Zettelkasten is my newsletter, Intersectional Thinking, and my Twitter account. So whenever I see an idea I think is perfect for Twitter or perfect for newsletter, I would tag them. For example, this one I want to write about in my newsletter. So I would give it the tag newsletter, which then means whenever I'm writing my newsletter, I don't have to sit there and wonder, oh, which idea should I write about? I already have a list of ideas with the tag newsletter that is ready for me to develop. And I mentioned this in this video here as well, if you want to check it out. Basically, let me show you. I use data view and I've started my writing idea tracker. So because I've tagged everything, I just use data view to give me a list of all the names of the notes I have that are for Twitter. For example, these are all the Twitter ideas that I want to visualize. These are all the newsletter ideas that I want to write about, so I never have to start from scratch, right? Remember, I don't want to reinvent the wheels. So this is a perfect way to use tags. For details of how to do this, you can check out my plugin video. All right, the second part about making a note search friendly is keywords. There are two ways I make sure keywords are in my notes. The first one is in the title. The reason you want to put a specific keyword in there that helps you retrieve it is because as your vault grows, as your Zettelkasten system grows, you might start to almost duplicate ideas. And what you want to do instead is build on existing ideas. So the way to do that, one is for the title of the note to remind you what the idea is. So here's a very brief, but I think important distinction between search and quick switcher. But quick switcher gives you a list of all the titles of your note. So whenever I create a new note, I first open quick switcher and I look for the keywords to see if I already have any notes that's on this topic. On sampling period, if I type in sampling period, there is nothing there. So I can create this note knowing I haven't worked on this before. But if it's something that I've taken a lot of notes on, let's see, identity, for example, there is a lot that's here, identity, multiple identity, dissonance of identity. So I want to look through the title of my notes that already exist before I create my new one. In this way, I'm already priming myself to connect ideas on a similar topic. So that's number one, putting the keywords that you think you will search for later down the line. The second thing about search is, of course, within the note, the search function will be able to reach. This is intentionally putting some keywords in there to make sure that when you're searching for the idea, it pops up. For example, I'm reading this other book on the Zen mind, the beginner's mind. So one of the notes that was interesting was in the book that they said the Buddha is someone who has followed the path, who has returned from sickness or is sickness, thusness, isness, emptiness, the full complete one. And I thought it was interesting, not fully understanding what it means, but I specifically added Buddhism behind this because the idea comes from the Buddha. And I want to later on, whenever down the line that I'm writing about notes on Buddha or Buddhism, I will most likely search for Buddha, right? I will put in the first few letters of Buddha and Buddhism. So I want to be able to find it. I want this to show up because otherwise it doesn't have anything on Buddhism, only Zen. And similarly, I put in the title Buddha to make sure that it doesn't matter how I search, this note will come up. And I think as you can already see, Zettelkasten is training you to not only observe ideas, being able to capture them, being able to recall them, and preparing for the future to be able to retrieve this information later down the line. So really, Zettelkasten, at least to me, is just a way of thinking about information and being able to grapple with it over time. To me, that's really powerful, that this note-taking system is teaching me how to be more aware of knowledge. So to recap, for keywords, you absolutely want to almost think like writing SEO type notes because you want to be able to find it again. And these words are typically at the topic level. So for example, for this one, I'm adding Buddhism as a general word that's not too specific so that I'm more likely to find this note later on when I'm trying to make connections. All right, step 3, connecting the notes, right? This is the most exciting, but also very frustrating step. But hopefully, as you can see, in the first 2 steps, we are already priming ourselves to connect. So hopefully this way of doing it should be easy, but let me explain. So when we first capture notes, they were like little stars floating around by themselves. And then we started to break ideas down in the concept of question, the idea itself, and all of the supplementary tools. So like anecdotes, like scientific studies and things like that. So already you have connected notes just by processing the note itself, just by breaking down the idea. And this step, we want to connect now laterally, right? So instead of just following the logic of how the idea came to be, how can we connect it to something that is related or seemingly unrelated? And one fabulous tool, I've mentioned this in my previous video on atomic and smart notes, is the idea compass or the compass of Zettelkasten thinking with my friend Faye, who came up with this idea. And let me show you how it works. So let's go back to the sampling period. As you can see, I have the compass written out here. There's west, similar, east, opposite, north, the theme or the question, and south, what does this lead to? Or if you think better with this type of visual, right, this is the idea in the middle and you're going in different directions. Let's start from west. This is, I think, one of the easiest ones because it stretches your thinking about what's similar. What are the things that support this idea? So already we've done the supporting idea part, right? That's the anecdotes, that's the studies, those are the tools. But also we can think about what other concepts are similar to this idea or that's related to this idea. And so for me, one that came to mind was the pie-shaped person, right? We've heard, or the T-shaped person, whatever. It's people who have breadth but also have a depth. And this is directly related to sampling period. And this takes this idea that's specific in sports and apply it to all sorts of other disciplines, right? At work, you know, in design, in creativity, we want to think about this as well. So actually, let me see if I have a note on creativity that I can add.
Creativity. Trouble creates intelligence. The more that you use it, the more you have it. It could be related. Okay, let's just put that in.
Also, this reminds me of the polymath. Let's see if I have anything on learn like a polymath, definition of polymath. Yep, right. Also, this reminds me of Nobel Prize scientists who typically, well, excuse me, have an artistic hobby. Let me see if I have that. Yeah, Nobel Prize in artists. That's what I mean. So in this way, we can already stretch our thinking in the similarity point of view, right? So we've taken an idea in sports. We've now applied it to music. We've applied it to science. We've applied it to education, like parenting. We've also stretched it to similar ideas of the pie-shaped person, the T-shaped person, right? Creativity, polymath, what this means for innovation. And even if you don't have any notes in your Obsidian, what you can do is just hit double bracket and create one. Let's say innovation. Multidisciplinary approach for innovation. If you didn't have this note, you can just write it out and add something to it. Put a placeholder and, you know, tag it, check or build, and you can build on the idea over time. Okay, so that is going west. Then going east, similarly, right, thinking about the opposites. What does the sampling period go against? Well, I think it's the general theme of we should be focusing. We should have grit. We should, you know, not be so scatterbrained. There's the Matthew principle, the case for focus, grit, 10,000 hour rule. The important thing is that we might write these first as opposites, but as we explore these, we could have realized that there's nuance to these seemingly opposite ideas, and in the end, they might be talking about the same things. And so these are just prompts for you to put some ideas out there in different directions. And in the end, as you explore them, they could no longer be opposites. And that's the best part, I think, about Zettelkasten, is it helps you, and not just Zettelkasten, but this idea compass, is it helps you think in different directions, trying to see the whole elephant. As my friend Michael Sklar says in his newsletter. Okay, moving on. North, right, these are the themes, these are the questions, so going up. Then we want to go south, right? What does this lead to? So now we know sampling period is a thing, and it affects long-term performance by sacrificing short-term specialization. What does it lead to? Well, I'm actually working on a piece on personal monopoly versus the niche. And I think there is a paradox about personal monopoly or niching down, which is without having a personal monopoly, you feel like you can't create, even though actually to get to a personal monopoly, you need to create first. This helps you see the full picture of not just connections, but where do ideas sit? There's an inherent hierarchy. And if you're interested in understanding, you know, how exactly the world works, and because ideas are not all created equal, how do they fit with each other? This is a great exercise. And for those of you who actually want to dive into this idea of the idea compass in detail, Faye and I did a workshop for Nick Milo's Linking Your Thinking conference. So there's a recording for that. I'll leave the link down below. And I want to emphasize, again, the point really is not about connecting the ideas per se. It's about training your brain to think in that way. So even if at the beginning, you know, you might have just one connection, don't worry, you're not doing it wrong. You might not even have any connections. And again, that's okay. It's just training ourselves to think in connections. So whenever we create a new note, we automatically think, how does this fit into everything else I understand about, the topic or the world or whatever it is. Let me know if I should expand on this idea of connecting your notes. The idea compass is just one tool. Now let's talk about step 4 of creating output, right? You've already have so many ideas. You can already share these ideas. Okay, so let me show you an example of step 4, creating the output, and also step 5 of how to then capture the reactions and the conversations you have from sharing ideas and capturing that serendipity that happens. So let's use friendship and likes. So there is a quote I saw in a book I was reading called Bewilderment, and it says that friendships were measured out now in shares and likes and links. So I tagged it Twitter first and wrote down what I thought about it. So I felt the need to support my friends with likes and shares. I almost felt like it was, in order to remain friends, I need to support their journey. And I'm wondering, what does this act replace? It's got me thinking. So I created a visual on Twitter that looks like this, changing the definition of friendship to the emotion one has towards another, measured by the number of likes and shares they provide. And from posting this, a Twitter friend of mine then reached out and told me about the idea of ship. Like shipping today means like ship a product the same way we're shipping friends. And I thought that was really another interesting take on how much our society has changed. And so then it gave me some ideas to work on in the future. And that's really, to me, a very easy way of turning what you're consuming into something that is your own, right? In the Zettelkasten thinking, it is basically turning the literature notes, the fleeting notes, into a permanent note that you shared, and then being able to build on that. Of course, this is just a simple example. When I write my newsletters, it doesn't happen so fast like this, and I have a few more steps I do, but this video is already getting so long. So if you're interested, let me know in the comments. I can share specific ways I do step 4, creating the output, and step 5, capturing the comments. The essence of the Zettelkasten workflow in Obsidian is the atomic note, so check out that video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!